The Mystery of the Cupboard by Lynne Reid Banks, Chapter 10, Patrick. Patrick arrived at lunchtime the next day. His mother had driven him to London and put him on the train at Waterloo to travel alone, the first time he had gone on a long journey by himself. So he was full of his adventures. And for some time, after Omri and his father picked him up at the station, no one else got a word in edgewise. There was this woman, like she had these three awful kids with her, and they made such a row. I wanted to move, but the train was practically full. I could only find a seat in the smoking section. Then I was with these three fellows who were like all swigging cans of beer and smoking their heads off. One of them kept telling stupid stories and roaring with laughter, so it almost made you deaf. The stink of smoke was awful. I kept coughing, and after a while one of them said, "Why didn't I just push off and find another seat?" But I couldn't, so they started trying to get rid of me. This big guy kept sort of moving in on me till I had hardly any room to sit, and the others were breathing smoke in my face on purpose. Honest, they were like really grotesque. Omri sat in the front and said nothing. He wasn't listening. What he was doing was trying to come to terms with one of the greatest disappointments of his life. Frederick's account had brought the writing to an end. The only other thing that was written in the notebook, though he had turned every remaining page almost frantically, was 2 lines. In yet another handwriting, quite different from the other 2, it was roughly written in blunt pencil and said, "Mrs. Driscoll died October 30, 1950, leaving instructions in confidence which will be followed to the letter." There were scribbled initials. They looked like 2 I's or 2 T's, or maybe one of each. Nothing about the cash box, nothing about the little people, fairies indeed. That was just like Frederick to think his mother was seeing fairies. The account of a wonder was not there. She had not lived long enough to write it. Omri had been more and more certain as he read that in the end Jessica Charlotte would reveal that she had brought little people to life through the key in the cupboard, just as Omri had years later. He was still certain, from hints in the notebook, that she had discovered its secret. But how had she used it? How she had used it, who her little people were, and how they had comforted her, had gone with her to the grave. Still, despite its cut-off ending, the account had unveiled a lot of other secrets he was bursting to share with Patrick, but obviously, for that he got to have them all to himself, which didn't happen for a frustratingly long time. Guillaume's friend Tony had already arrived by car when they returned, together with his parents, friends of the family. So they had to have tea in the garden. It was no longer strewn with old thatch, which had all been taken away, but the men were still working on the new roof. Omri's family had gotten quite used to watching them now, but the newcomers were fascinated, especially Tony's father, who was a journalist and part American. He was full of questions and said he might do an article on thatching for an American magazine, especially when he heard about the bottle. He pored over the photocopies Omri's dad had made of the various bits of paper. He was quick to spot the possibility that some of the last-time Thatchers were still alive. "I'd love to interview them," he said eagerly. "Why not?" said Omri's father. He spoke to the head Thatcher, who said, "If you was to be stopping over, you might speak to old Tom tomorrow lunchtime at the pub. I told the lad." He indicated Omri. This was the first time Omri's parents had heard about this. Omri had hoped private arrangement. Nothing seemed to be private anymore, and Omri gritted his teeth. So much for the quiet talk he had hoped to have with Tom tomorrow. Tony's parents promptly decided to spend the night at a bed and breakfast place. After tea, Omri was just trying to cut Patrick out of the group and get him up to his room, when his mother gaily suggested that Omri and Guillaume take Patrick and Tony on a tour. This took ages because, maddeningly, Patrick was really interested and kept exploring and asking questions, especially about the hens. He was absolutely fascinated about the fox. "But the hen house shuts. How did he get in to kill them?" "Through a bit of tear in the wire. There, see where Dad mended it?" "But he couldn't have got them out through that." "He didn't. He just killed 3, ate one on the spot, and left the others." "Wow, how did they look dead?" "Horrible, no heads." "Blood everywhere," said Guillaume with some relish. "Grotesque!" This was evidently Patrick's current favorite word. Then he said, "Hey, Omri, where's your cat?" There was silence. Don't tell me the fox got her too, Omri said. I don't know. We don't know what's happened to her. She's been missing ever since we got here. He had a pang of disloyalty because he actually hadn't thought about her much since he'd been reading the account. Tough luck. Sorry, said Patrick. Poor old Kitsa. Omri, thinking the tour was over, opened his mouth to suggest they go up to his room to talk when Patrick said, Did you say the wood by the river was yours too? Excellent. Let's go down there and explore. Yeah, chimed Tony, and the two of them took off across the yard like a pair of foxhounds on the scent. Guion echoed Omri's sigh. Just a pair of townies, he said sadly. Patrick's not. He's lived in the country for 2 years. Kent, said Guion. Flat, all orchards and stuff. No wild parts. Not Dorset. You can't blame them, really. Omri stared at him. You like it here now, then, he said in surprise. Not much more than a week ago, Guion had still been moaning about leaving London. Don't be a dog, said Guion obscurely. Come on, let's show them that climbing tree with the old rook's nests. Do you think Dad'll let us take the blow-up dinghy on the river? What with one thing and another, it was bedtime before Omri got Patrick alone. The two boys were sharing Omri's room while Tony was to sleep in Adiel's. We'll have to talk quietly, said Omri. The walls are very thin. You can hear everything. Patrick looked at him. Oh, yeah, he said, evidently remembering for the first time that Omri had something to tell him. He picked up the rucksack that contained his few things, namely 2 sets of spare trainers, his Walkman, and almost no clothes, and from a side pocket extracted a small plastic bag with some cotton wool inside. Out of the bed he carefully unwrapped the figure of a cowboy on a black horse. The little man, seated on the high-pommeled western saddle, wore a plaid shirt and chaps, boots, spurs, and no hat. Patrick fingered him lovingly. Hope he got his hat back, he said. Remember at his wedding when he said he couldn't legally be married without a hat? The boys stifled fond laughter. He'd lost his nerve. He got it back again. I do wonder how they're getting on. Emma thinks Ruby Lou might have had a baby by now. Pretty quick if so. They've only been married 10 months. 11. Isn't Ruby Lou a bit old? I don't think she's more than about 30. Do you think Boone still drinks whiskey? He said he'd stop. Bet he didn't. What do you reckon's happening to Little Bear and Bright Stars? But for once, Omri didn't want to reminisce or talk about their little people. Guessing's okay, but look at this, he said quietly. It's something better than guessing. He took the notebook from under the pillow and solemnly handed it to Patrick. Patrick turned it over in his hands, opened it in the middle, peered close in a comic sort of way, as if the writing were microscopic, read a few sentences, frowned, opened it in another place, and read a bit more. Omri found his fingers itching. Don't, he said sharply. Patrick looked up. What? Don't just rifle through it like that, reading a bit here and a bit there. You have to read it right through properly. Patrick rifled again and said, All this? In this tiny writing it'd take forever. He put the book down and Omri at once picked it up. Tell me what's in it. Omri felt himself getting wound up. He'd been a bit wound up ever since the station, to be honest. This was Patrick all over, so full of himself and not prepared to be bothered if something were difficult or took a lot of concentration. But he was Omri's friend in a very special way. He knew the secret, had shared in it, and there was, in any case, no one else he could tell about the account with which he was bursting. Besides, don't judge. Don't judge if you've ever done anything mad yourself. Omri kept on remembering that. He sat on his bed with the book in his hands. All right, he said, only listen properly, it's complicated. And slowly and carefully he recapitulated the whole story of his find of the accounts of Jessica Charlotte and then Frederick. And we'll pause there.